Good morning, everybody. Almost lunchtime. And for me, it's a special conference because it's like coming home to the Israel Air Force Center after several years. And I remember when we started this space conference, then at the time, 2006, I could recall by heart the number of satellites that went up each year, because it was roughly 1,000 satellites in total, and every year less than 100 satellites came up. And this is not the case anymore. And each year, I can tell you it's a wow year in space. I'm not going to give you anything about the space economics, but just a glimpse into what humanity's succeeded by sending some very interesting space missions. And like my good friend Danny Bloomberg said, it is almost science fiction missions. But let's start with a few numbers. Last year, we saw a huge amount of launches, and many people at the audience here might remember that at the time, one launch vehicle equals one satellite, and of course, this is not the case today. So we saw 211 successes, 11 failures worldwide, one partial failure. Usually, it means that the satellite is in space, but not in the correct orbit. And almost 3,000 satellites made it into space last year alone. So this is, again, a world record, and I believe that in the 20th Ilan Ramon conference, this record will break once more. So who sent satellites into space? This is not the number of satellites, but the countries that launched some missions, satellites, space explorations, and so on. And you can see 116 from the United States. Most of them are by a private company, SpaceX. So SpaceX is an amazing company, of course, and you can see the share of launches from that company. You can compare it with the world, not just inside the United States. And 67 from China, 19 from Russia. You can see Israel, one launch, a very successful launch, and the satellite, this was not the only satellite that went into space that was made in Israel, but the other one was launched by SpaceX to a customer abroad. And we saw launches from Iran. And by the way, Iran is trying hard to make it into this conference for years. And just recently, they launched 3 satellites by a relatively not so reliable launch vehicle. It was the first ever orbital insertion of satellites from this launch vehicle. And to hear more about it, you'll have to come to next year's conference. Most of the satellites are going into low Earth orbit, meaning that this is a very crowded environment in space, a lot of challenges for space situational awareness, and how to operate in such a dense environment in space is an ever-growing challenge for every space mission and every spacefaring nation. And we can see a large decline in the number of satellites going to higher orbit, like the geostationary orbit. This is because at least some of the traditional uses of such a high orbit is now being replaced by low Earth orbit constellations like that of the SpaceX and Amazon, Project Kuiper, and of course Starlink and Starshield. And we saw several new nations, new countries with their own national satellite, and I don't know what was the reason behind the Pope's decision to send a satellite into space. Nevertheless, it was a very successful mission with cooperation with the University of Rome. And other space countries now, you can call them space country, you can see Albania, Djibouti, Ireland, Oman, and like I said, the Vatican City. So among the more than 200 countries in the world, more than 70 countries possess their own satellites. So this is a very good ratio. But There are many more countries that need to go into space, so I believe next year this slide won't be empty. We will see new flags inside. So we said goodbye and merci pour votre service for the Ariane 5 space launcher. And we all remember 2 years ago it successfully placed in space the James Webb Space Telescope. And we saw first flight of many new satellite launch vehicles. In red, this symbolizes a failure, and in gray, a success. And if it's gray and red, it's not my mistake. It's you can call it successful failure. You could call it a partial success. So we saw several new launchers from China, and we saw, of course, the long-awaited launch, the first launch of Starship by SpaceX, and actually we saw also the second one, and it could be in February this year that we will see the third launch of this mega rocket. 21 astronauts launched into orbit in 2022. This is an average rate of crewed missions to space, 3 from the United States, all of them on board the Dragon spacecraft. One of them was a private mission, the AX-2, and now AX-3 is in space. 2 Shenzhou missions from China and 1 Soyuz launch from Russia. But don't forget the suborbital regime of space, and we saw 36 people that went over the Kármán line, all of them inside the spaceplane by Virgin Galactic. So we saw also in this regard, we saw a governmental mission from Italy. Several people from the Italian Air Force went into a suborbital flight, and so you can see the Italian flag inside. So we can now understand that this is not about just about space tourism. It's about research. It's about experience of people launching themselves into a weightlessness environment, even if it's just for a few minutes. And of course, we saw the announcement of the crew, the lucky crew of Artemis 2. I still don't sure when they will go to their space mission, but it will be the first crewed mission around the world, around the moon, with no landing since December 1972. And this is something like a science fiction mission. And you can see from the timeline that we have to be very patient in order to get the scientific results from deep space missions. European Space Agency launched successfully the JUICE mission to Jupiter and its icy moons. And there is something from Israel on board as well, an atomic clock by Israeli firm Accubit. So the launch in 2023, the spacecraft will arrive just in 2031. So we will have to wait to hold a panel on the results of those scientific explorations of Jupiter and its icy moons, including Europa, with its underground, under ice ocean. So maybe life will be found on this very interesting place. And we saw the world's first launch of a 3D printed launcher. More than 75% of all the mass, excluding the fuel, the propellants, are 3D printed. And it was almost total success, meaning that it lofted and passed through max Q and successful separation between first and second stage, successful ignition of the second stage, but then it cut off. Nevertheless, the company, which is a private company, Relativity Space, already announced that they will not build another one like this, and they are moving forward to the operational launcher, also 3D printed. And I spoke about the Starship, and this is indeed a new era. Already Elon Musk reduced the price of 1 kilogram into orbit by an order of magnitude already by using its Falcon 9. And of course, the key word is not just the reliability, but reusability of the launcher, at least the first stage. And this will make the next revolution in space and access to space almost for all, because the cost for 1 kilogram into space will be lower, again, by an order of magnitude in comparison to what we are now today. And we saw the perseverance of DPRK, North Korea, after two successive failures. They managed to understand what went wrong, and they placed a satellite using a new type of satellite launch vehicle. And this is not a ballistic missile, but it got a lot of the technologies, especially the engines, from that country's ballistic missile program. And we saw the first flight of 2 astronauts from Saudi Arabia, and some of you on the audience met at least the astronaut on the right in Baku when we were at the IAF. So Saudi Arabia is very active in space, and they have very enthusiastic people at the Saudi Space Commission and Saudi Space Agency. And we saw also a demonstration of Iran's space capsule. It's like Iranian Mercury. It will carry an Iranian astronaut to a suborbital mission in the next few years. So we know about it at least from 2012. But this was the first launch, suborbital, uncrewed, and it was unsuccessful during the landing phase. Nevertheless, it will be interesting. And NASA, of course, NASA conducted some magic, and they retrieved the space capsule from OSIRIS-REx mission to an asteroid. And as you can see on the bottom left, they even succeeded in opening the box and collect all the samples from this asteroid. And there is going to be another rendezvous with an asteroid, and I'll speak a bit in a second. And we saw unsuccessful landing of Russia's Luna 25, which was the first lunar mission by Russia since 1976. The moon is hard to land on. We know it in Israel. And we saw a successful mission from India with a small rover that successfully landed, soft landed on the moon. And like I said, there is another exciting mission to an asteroid. This time it will be an all-metallic asteroid, some celestial body that we never examined from a close distance. So it was launched successfully. Again, this is a demonstration of the cooperation between the government and the private sector, because the spacecraft is from NASA and the launcher is from SpaceX. This time it's the Falcon Heavy. So again, this was an amazing year in space. 2024 already is an amazing year in space, and it will be more amazing. So you'll have to wait to next year's space conference. And in the unlikely case of someone wanted to connect with me, you have my several ways of communication. So thank you very much.